I was born January the 11th, 1942 in Fayetteville City Hospital. My father was Louis James Perona, and my mother was Margaret Bell Jones. My father's side was Carolina Piazza Perona after marriage, and Firmino Frank Perona. He came in He came when he was 26. He was out of the Italian army, had gone into France and migrated here from France. My mother's parents were Hetty Jones, Sizemore. She was Sizemore before she married, and Ike Jones, and they were pretty much Cherokee and Scotland. I had a brother, Louis, who is 4 years younger than I am. And then I had a sister 14 years younger, Cerise. She was born when I was in high school at St. Scholasticus. Well, starting with my grandparents, my Italian grandparents, they had a store, a grocery store, and a filling station, and then their living quarters were above all that. Now my dad and mom, he was in everything. We had a feed mill, which took care of chicken houses and cattle, and orchards, grapes, cattle, chickens. He was in partners with a couple of uncles and my mother's brothers in Oklahoma in oil. So Dad was one of these who had the foresight to know what to do and when to do it. The store was the Perona Grocery, and it was across the dirt road from where I lived and across catty corner from the Catholic Church in Tontitown. And it sold everything grocery. Everything grocery plus some hardware, things that were needed on the farms or what they were doing, with their jobs. Because many of them at that time were still coal mining in Oklahoma and coming back and forth, and the wives were literally taking care of the farms and the children to make a living till they could get their orchards established and get things going. Just from what my nonna told me and my no-no, it was hard on the families. The wife was there with all the children, the upkeep of whatever land they had, scrounging out vegetables. I remember even as a child going with my grandmother and my daddy to cut what they called wild greens in the spring. And you mix those with boiled eggs, which everybody had some chickens, and vinegar and oil, and it was a bitter salad, but everybody loved it. But it was hard times. I still remember my grandmother, even when she didn't need to, still keeping her chickens and keeping her garden. Oh, I wasn't the farm girl. After school, I walked to the feed mill and did my homework there and took orders on the phone for feed, and I weighed the trucks that came through with chickens that were being taken to the slaughter. And I learned how to work those big scales early. So I did that. That's what I did after school. And then, of course, my mother was a house cleaning nut, and she was afraid to do the second story windows, so I would hang out the window and do them, just try to scare her. I would just hang out there and just say, "Oh, Mom, it's okay." Got the windows washed. Well, she didn't let me cook. But in the mornings, I was the first one up, always was. I would get the coffee on, set the table, and then I would take off down the dirt road to the fields. And I guess I was just into watching things come alive in the morning. And then I would get back home and Mom would be down in the kitchen by then fixing breakfast. But I was the dishwasher mostly. Dishwasher, and I kept the floors buffed. Mother had to have the floors buffed. So I buffed. Well, there was always family prayer, and everybody had to be there. We had to be there for meals until we were leaving home. You were there for the supper meal. You were around the table. And it was always a discussion of what you did that day, what you planned to do. There were always questions. Dad always asked us questions of dreaming, of what would you dream to do? What would you dream to do? And we would go through those. And it was just really, lots of times we'd take family drives in the evening. And just looking at the countryside, we all loved nature and wildflowers and weeds. We knew the names of almost everything we could find. And a lot of times we'd just go down to the creek to just swim. though Daddy couldn't swim, he taught us all how to swim. Well, my mama's sister lived close, she and her husband and her 3 children. And so we always had cards going on. The families would play cards, and a lot of times, all winter and all summer, the men in Tontitown would go frog gigging together, and there was always Bill Fiore and Joseph Rosso and my dad, and there was one more, Jack Zupo, and they would go frog gigging, and then the next night, whoever was hosting it that night of the group, the wives, would have a big fish fry or a big frog fry in the backyard, you know, set it all up, kids everywhere. And that's bird hunting in the winter. So we had polenta, you know, they make the polenta, and the women would be crocheting and the men would be playing poker or other card games, and the kids would all just be playing. It was a fun way to grow up. You didn't have the worries. Nobody worried. I remember when my grandmother and grandfather no longer ran the store, and the Artemani brothers, B and Richard, took over that little store. And then they had it for quite some time, and then they moved across the road and built what they called the Mercantile, and the building is still there. And I was sort of a pet, and they always babied me. They would come and get me and take me to the store with them and let me hang out. And I was just a little kid, you know, just a little kid. Emma and Claude Mersani, on down 68, used to be called 68, had a little grocery store too. And then there was the Luncheonette, which was across from the old Venetian Inn. And it was, Bill and Fern Fiore had that little Luncheonette. And I remember going down there in the evenings and maybe have a hamburger. And they had punch boards, you know, little punch boards you could punch out and win things. And they would play cards. And behind the Luncheonette was a big ball field. And all the Tontitown guys were baseball, American Legion. All summer, we would go down, and the big tall ones, Guy and Henry Barriola and Bill Fiore, were the tall ones, and they were usually pitchers, tall and lanky. And our boys could always win. I do not know why those Italian boys always won. But Sundays, during ball season, you took your blankets, and if you were lucky to have those wooden folding chairs, something to sit in for the older people, and we'd go down to the ball field, and that's what we did all day. And the old men, there's a bocce court there too, and the old men would play bocce. The kids would run around, and we'd watch the games. But those boys were good. I don't know if I have pictures. I know my half-sister has pictures. So that was a big thing for Tontitown. We didn't have a lot of outside activities because we were kind of an isolated little place out there. And it seemed like that was one of the big things in the summer was baseball. 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 It was fun. Bocce. The old men played bocce every chance they got at the bocce court. And I loved to watch them because they would not talk in English most of the time. They were the old-timers. And they would just get all perturbed because their ball didn't go in. You knocked my ball. And it was just it was carefree times. It was happy times. People were happy. They didn't care what they had or didn't have. I lived in one spot. The house was exactly across the street from the old church, the priest's house, the nun's house, and the school. So I was watched very carefully by all of the nuns. The priest, they could always see what I was doing. And then I lived across the street from the old grocery store and the feed mill. But we were just right there in the center, and it was an old house. It was a historical house. It was probably at one time a boarding house or a hotel. And when Mother and Daddy got married, they took this house and made it livable, really. And we lived in the downstairs till my brother was born and had an outdoor toilet. I remember that thing because I didn't like going down there because there were bees in the trumpet vines. You know, every outhouse had bees. So, Tontitown Catholic school, that's where we went to school. All the kids from Tontitown, that's where we were. The Mercy nuns were our teachers. And we didn't have like music, we didn't have like PE. You went outside and played, you didn't need PE. We went out and we played softball, we played hopscotch. Everybody had roller skates. Everybody had jacks. We played dodgeball. We were active little things. I'll tell you, the nuns would get out and do it with us. We had the swings, you know, and things like that. And on the grounds of the school was a grotto, a beautiful old rock grotto. It's since been torn down. And we loved going down checking that. We had outhouses, and we had a pump, a water pump that you had. If you wanted to drink, you had your little fold-up tin cup. You folded it out, somebody pumped the water, and you get a drink. I remember being sent home about every day in first grade. I had, like I said, I had been a pet at school, and the nuns would come and get me, even tiny, and take me home with them. And so I was used to having them cater to me. So when I got in first grade, I was in for a rude surprise. I was in a classroom. They would pin a little note to my collar, walk me down the road, send me across the street. My mother would spank my bottom, take me back down. One day, I remember, I walked in the kitchen. Mother's standing there. She put her hands on her hips. She said, "I've had enough of this." She took that note off, crumpled it up, threw it in the trash, took my little hand and walked me back down to school, knocked on the first grade door. And I think it was Sister Bernadine came to the door and she said, "You made her this way, now you can punish her." Sister Bernadine said, "I can't punish her, I can't do it." Mother said, "And I'm not doing it for you anymore." So that was the end of that. I straightened up though. Well, my favorite and remained favorite girlfriends all my life still was Adrienne Mersani and Gilda Stolfi. We were just like three peas in a pod. We did everything together. We even went to school at St. Scholasticus together. Adrienne was my maid of honor. We still stay in touch. We still stay in touch. And when we talk, it's like we've never been apart. It's like we just picked up the conversation from 10 minutes ago. I remember Sister Bernadine. She was as round as a basketball. I mean, she looked like a basketball with a head. She was adorable. And she was always jolly and laughing. Sister Wilhelmina was so precious. She was so sweet and so kind. And then there was Sister Winifred, who would walk by my desk for no reason and thump me in the head with her knuckle, just for no reason. I never looked at her because I didn't want her to know I even felt it. I didn't want her to know I was going to ask her, "Why do you keep doing that to me?" But it was me. She would thump in the head with her knuckle. And honestly, she probably had a lot more to do with my shaping and discipline than the other ones who I was a pet to. She shaped the disciplinary of me. I went to high school in Fort Smith at St. Scholastica's Girl Academy. It was a boarding school for girls. My aunt, Josephine, was Sister Xavier. She was a Benedictine nurse from St. Sco. And I always wanted to go. And I thought, if I can just go, I'll really love it. Well, the first year I hated every second of it. I wanted to come home. But I thought, you know, I started this, I'm sticking this out. The second year Adrienne came, the third year Jill came, so we were all four together for 2 more years. And it was an absolute wonderful education. The nuns were, you know, you think of a nun, you look at them in their habits and you think, it's a nun. It's not. It's some happy person who knows how to skip rope and have fun just like you do. Really. Our church was straight across the street, St. Joseph's Catholic Church from my house. And I think the nuns and priests expected me to be there every time they opened the door because I lived right there. And we did have Mass every day before classes. And there was this one particular woman, Angela Lazzari, and they all know her. And I was born with defective knees. I can't kneel on hard surfaces. And back then, the kneelers weren't padded. And so I would kneel, and about halfway through Mass, I would have to lean back because I would just be screaming in pain. And she would thump me in the back of the head with her prayer book. And she did it constantly. Well, Mother had a little talk with her too, and that stopped. But the church was beautiful. The ceremonies were gorgeous. The Christmas, there was such care taken in decorating, and everybody came together to do it. Easter was glorious. Lent was the music. It was just, and I was in the choir. Of course, from the time I could walk, I was in the choir because Mr. Millar, who lived down the street at the Bedino store, little Bedino store, and he was our organist. And he would walk up every day, and he would stop and take me with him. And I would sit on the end of the bench while he played the organ. And he would have me just sing. And I was just little. I might have been 5 or 6 years old. And my love of music grew through him. And church was community. That's where everybody gathered, you know. Mr. Millar was the one who rang the bells. And it was always at death. Mr. Millar would ring the bells. I think it may be 1 toll if it were a man, or 2 tolls if it were a woman, and then really fast if there was an emergency. But he always was the bell keeper, and I could see him scurrying up the road, getting to the church because he had heard of the death. Things travel fast in a little town. Everything travels fast in a little town. No matter what you've done, whether you died or you're alive, it travels fast. But that was how we knew someone in the community had died. And most of the time we would know who had been sick and who was near death. So we always pretty much knew which the toll was for. Sometimes at noon and at 6 o'clock at the prayer called the Angelus. And they would ring the bell for the Angelus, and it was a special prayer to honoring Jesus' mother, Mary, and then at 6 o'clock at night. Now I'm not sure how long that lasted, but I do remember that when I was real young. Depended on what time of year it was. If it was Halloween, we all got in trouble because we followed the big kids to turn over toilets. And when I did that, I paid for it. My daddy had made me pay for it. I had to go to everybody's door that I had, even if I hadn't been part of it, if I was there, I had to go apologize. He made me go apologize. We had a place called Sherry Hole. The big boys had dammed up Brush Creek and had a swing coming out of the tree. Of course, you had to be a big kid to swing out of that rope and land in the water. But the older boys, I think it was like Leslie Maestri, Celestia Penzo, the older boys, the Penzo boys, had dammed up that creek and made a wonderful swimming hole. We used it even after our kids were born. That's how good it was. And of course, we bicycled, we wandered around, we went caroling for Christmas. We could wander and no one ever would worry about somebody touching your child, because I think the whole town would have lynched anybody who touched a child. We felt safe. We always felt safe. We'd take a coal oil lantern and head down the road at night, just walking, just going where we wanted to go. Cards. Cards. They played a lot of cards, a lot of canasta, a lot of pitch, a lot of poker. And the old men, even the young men too, took up did bocce. Horseshoes. You know, it was common entertainment for us. Music, the dances, especially wedding dances. Everybody wanted somebody to get married because weddings were different then. The bride and groom didn't leave, they stayed. And there were always huge spaghetti dinners and dances all night long. Grandmas dancing with grandmas and kids dancing with kids. And it was just, it was community, total community. The first great festival I actually remember, I was probably 6 years old, and I was with my nonna. She had me by the hand, and she took me down, and it looked like the biggest thing in the world. And it was very small back in my day. We didn't have, it seems a lot more commercial now, and I understand why. But then it was not. It was more of a celebration for the grape picking season being over and it being successful and everybody celebrating. But we would walk and look at the exhibits and we'd look at the little rides, and she would put me on the Ferris wheel, or not the Ferris wheel, but the merry-go-round, and we'd ride it together. And I was so intrigued by what was her name? Red River Red. White River Red was the little gypsy woman who had the carnivals back in that day. And she would come somewhere about from Winslow, is where she used to live. And she would bring, and it was just intriguing to me to see this gypsy woman. I would just watch her, just watch and listen to her as she was calling in people to her shell games and the little carnival ride she had. But she was a part of that for many, 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 many years. Just those, and seeing all the people, and you would see, I know the older people especially looked forward to those who had moved away from Tontitown. It was like a reunion. The Great Festival was like a reunion. People would come from their faraway homes, and that's where you saw everybody again. And even in my day, that was true. It had to be the summer of '58 when we ran for Queens, and it was Pauline Fiore, Gilda Stolfi, and me. And it was the first year we girls kind of bucked up and said, you know what? We want the people to vote. We don't want to sell tickets to see who votes. Well, that was just not too heard of, because that was a money-making thing, was we sold tickets. Your families sold tickets to whatever was going to be given away, whether it was a car, a truck, or whatever. And that's where revenue came in. Well, we three got together and decided we weren't doing that. It kind of caused a big mess, but we did not do it. We didn't sell tickets. And it turned out just fine. They made just as much money. And it was kind of fun to get a gown. You know, we designed our own dresses, and a dressmaker made them for us. And we thought we were all queens. We weren't. We were just little girls, just little teenage girls. We had a good time. We got really together close. We would do the caravan. They would call the caravan for the Great Festival, and we would take flatbed trucks, and of course a lot of adults, and we would go to all the little towns and sort of announce about the Great Festival, and then we would sing a song. And why we would, in the name of God, why we would sing Vaya con Dios is an Italian song I'll never know, but my friend and I would always sing Vaya con Dios. We sang that song as advertising for the Great Festival. We dressed in costumes, you know, and it was kind of fun. It was a lot of fun. We met a lot of people that way. And I'm sure we looked like country bumpkins, but you know what? We didn't know the difference, and we didn't really care.
So who won Queen that year?
That was Pauline Fiore. Franco, she was the queen that year. And Gilda and I said, well, that's good, because we didn't want our hair messed up with the crown putting on. We just decided we'd just soon be who we were. It was fun. I remember those making spaghetti as a very young child, and it was in the old school basement, and it was hotter than Hades. And there were no machines for making spaghetti at that time. It was all done by hand. It was rolled out by hand. It was cut by hand. And we were part of the hangers. The young girls would hang the spaghetti after it was cut on racks for it to dry. But it was days and millions of eggs. Later, we'd have all of the spaghetti done and bagged. Now later, they had the big machines and things to do in a modern kitchen with air conditioning. But I love the memories of being down in that basement with all those women chattering and laughing, and they enjoyed each other. You know, it was like family to me. I still have really fond memories of that time. And then us young girls would serve the spaghetti. We were waitresses. We thought we were so cool because we were waitresses. And we would serve the dinners and clear the tables and keep the grapes on the table. And it was just, it's what you did. It's what you did. Oh yeah, one year Adrienne and I were designated as the entertainment. So we sang songs. We stood on this little bitty stage and sang songs with no music. We just sang. And then the years we were, did the tarantella, the Italian dance. And there were I think there were 6 of us girls. Half were boys, half were dressed as girls. And we did the Italian tarantella dance, which is the dance to keep you from dying when the tarantula bites you. I think it's something to do with that. But we did those things. A lot of people don't like Lent, the time of before Easter, when it's a little harsher. You're fasting and you're praying. And I always loved the Stations of the Cross in church. The choir we were always up in the choir, but it was always a big celebration. I mean, it was a big production. It's not anymore. It seems like people don't even want to come, but the music, the singing, the candles, and then the statues were covered, the cross was covered because Jesus was no longer with us. They were draped in purple. Now it's just not the same. And the Easter Eve, when everything was uncovered and Jesus had risen from the grave, and the candles and the music and the ceremony and the vestments were just spectacular. I remember that. My eyes, I can still see it. It almost makes me cry. Memo Morsani was married to our postmistress, and he had a glorious, glorious voice. When he sang, everybody wanted to sound like Mamo. And everybody, we had a big choir. Those Italian people, we can sing. We may not be able to do a lot of other things, but we can sing. Good voices, harmony. And that's always been a big part of Tontitown, was the good choir, the good music, you know, just being together. Well, in the 60s, you know, the 40s for me and most of the 50s did not change that much. The one thing that did change was for us personally as a family, was when the grape pickers became machines. They picked at night. Before that, it was all the Indians from Oklahoma, which we had families we knew for years who came every year. And I would be down in the vineyards, I mean, after dark. Mother didn't worry about me. I may eat turtle for supper with them, and then I would go home from the campfires. But when the machines came, Daddy went through a few years of the machines, and he said, the romance is gone. The vineyards, the romance is gone. And we stopped harvesting grapes. He pulled out the vineyard. That was so sad for me. But he was right. The whole romance of vineyards was gone. But I remember the crazy things they would cook anything, and it was good. I mean, like I said, I've eaten turtle. I've probably eaten raccoon. And Dad kept them well supplied with water and whatever they needed, because he said, you take care of your people. That you take care of your people and you will have good pickers every year. And he was right. He was good to his people. Vegetables, we supplied them with fresh vegetables from the garden. You know, the luncheonette was gone. The bocce court was gone. We started seeing metal buildings going up, which today we still see, and and I know it's necessary. Businesses are necessary. But I'm a person, I don't like a lot of change. My house was moved when my brother got married. They moved to the house from the corner down to what is now Pam Trucking. You can kind of see the house if you go looking for it. Paul Allen Maestri wanted it as office quarters because it was a historic house. And he moved that house. When my brother sold that part of the farm, Paul Allen bought it for Pam, to be Pam's base, and the house is still there. The Venetian Inn was probably what we called our fine dining. Mary Maestri's. I remember Mary Maestri's, before she was up on the highway, had a little place down the road from us in her rock home. And during the war, to feed her family, people sat on the bed, they would come and eat. She had them sitting everywhere, and she prepared food. And then she moved up on the highway at 412 and 68 there at the corner. It's gone now. But it was famous. It was good for a very, very long time. Now, there was also a little place down the road from us, close to Claude and Emma's grocery store. And it was just like I don't want to say it was the Red Door, because it wasn't. But it was just a little hamburger joint. You could go in there and just have a hamburger and visit with people. It took the place of the luncheonette. When Bill and Fern Fiore let the luncheonette go, this became the new place to gather for just casual talking and doing stupid things like calling them and saying, do you have Prince Albert in a can? Well, if you do, let him out. You know, we would call that place. They had to know who we were. It was a party line out there. They knew who we were. So, you know, that kind of crazy thing that you did. It was just little lodgings. I mean, just little lodgings. Some people stayed permanently. It was just like overnight things, just little overnight places. And I don't know too much about those. I know that there was also a liquor store close by, so that could have something to do with the cabins being so close. But the Venetian Inn was a real place where people worked. I remember every waitress, Elsie Mae and Lorraine, and there were just, you remembered each person that worked there. You knew every woman in that kitchen who made the sauce and spaghetti by hand. Everything was done perfectly, and the place was crowded all the time. You were lucky as a resident to get in. It was just that kind of place back then. I remember the canning factory Dad had. I wasn't very old, but I was a daddy's girl, and he would come and get me and take me with him when he would go to Oklahoma to get produce that was out of season. He would take me, and I mean, I'm not big enough to be away from Mama, but Daddy wanted me with him. So in the canning factory, he would get me and go down during grape season when they were doing grape juice, or during bean season, during green beans or spinach or tomatoes. And many times Mom would come and bring supper at night, and he had a little place, we wouldn't call it an office, but he had a little desk and a bed and a little dresser. And they'd pull out the drawer and pat it and put me in there. That's where I slept at night, you know, because Dad was there a lot during canning season. He didn't come home. So we'd just walk down and stay with him. Had a whistle. This thing had a whistle. I remember that steam whistle at the canning factory. And it would blow, time to come to work. It would blow at noon, time to eat, blow again in the evening when it was time to leave. And a lot of people, a lot of Mom's friends, my mom worked there. In fact, that's where she met my dad, was in the canning factory. They worked there. A lot of the women from the town, most of her friends later in life, after married life, worked there. For a long time, mostly, we married each other. Well, I went away to school, and when I came home, I was usually the new girl. If you're gone for 9 months, you come home in the summer, you're new girl again. And I told my mama, I said, Mama, if I even look like I like one of these boys out here, just slap me silly, because I don't want to marry one. And I don't know why at that time I said that. I think we were all like cousins. Everybody was like your cousin. Well, half of them were my cousins. And, you know, intermarriage began. The boys started bringing home different girls, and the girls would bring home different boys. So it became a mixture of not just Italian, as it had been most of my whole growing up life. It became a mixture. And I think some of and I don't mean this in a bad way, but a lot of the strong traditions died a little bit with that, because if you haven't been raised in it, it doesn't mean anything to you to carry it on. Now, I'm not saying that of all, because so many people who have married in and have made themselves a part of that community have picked it up beautifully, or it would have died already if they hadn't. They've done a good job. But that's the biggest change I remember seeing. I'd say it's like the Italian Huns. That's what we're like in Tontitown. It's very individual, very opinionated, very strong in faith. If you want to have a good discussion, you go find some of these old guys in the park. You will have a good discussion. It's just it's a loving place. It doesn't look or sound like it used to, but the basis of Tontitown will probably never change. What it always has been is what it's probably always going to be, and I hope it never changes. My favorite thing about Tontitown is I love the idea of community. I still, every now and then, Jim and I will go to church out there, and I feel like I've never been gone. I can talk to people that I remember. I can talk to their children whom I've never met, and feel right at home. It's just a place where it's familiar, it's comfortable. It's like putting on your favorite sweatshirt, and just enjoying being surrounded by things that are familiar. Even though you may not have known about them, they're still familiar. The choir is still singing. It's still beautiful. The church is beautiful, even the new church. And many things in that church are from the old church. And you look around and you see these things, and you feel, again, the love and the work that went into building it. The hard work that went into building that church in the beginning. And the people who are still so faithful. And then you look around and you see those who are missing. Those who helped raise you. Who made you who you are. Who encouraged you. And your heart kind of hurts a little bit. Because I loved so many of those people. They were good to me. They were good to me. That's what I tell people. Go out and be loved. Go out and be loved. Go out and eat.